Welcome back to the Brimming Pot, fellow listeners. This is your host, EQ Samuels. Last episode, we discussed the origins of evil and touched on how humans can encompass such uncontrollable darkness. If you're still with me by this episode, you've been exposed to some darkness in the world, but it's my hope to inform you, not necessarily alarm you. So thank you for tagging along. This week I'm going to discuss a topic of which many people harbor hatred for. That is understandable considering the gravity of the issue. This week I'll cover things that will probably make you uncomfortable, but it's the psychology behind the otherwise heinous act of sexual urges coming to fruition that needs to breathe a little bit. If you want to tune out once you hear the title, that is your prerogative. But I urge you to stick around and learn about this. Just to reiterate, as a broken record does, and just as a disclaimer, I am not a licensed therapist, psychologist, or any other form of medical professional, and the information being provided is merely a reasonably fresh perspective on things, as seen through my mind's eye. This week I will cover the psychology behind child molesters and pedophiles. And no, I'm not asking you to show pity or remorse for any of them that are currently imprisoned or out in the world right now. Also to note, of which most people don't know, there's definitely a difference between child molesters and pedophiles. I found this bit of information on www.pedophilesdon'tdiscriminate.com, and I found it helpful on a basic level. So, here it is. The truth is, not all pedophiles are child molesters, and not all child molesters are pedophiles. Pedophilia is actually a diagnosable disorder where the individual has either a primary or exclusive attraction to prepubescent children. A child molester is someone who touches a child sexually. A pedophile becomes a child molester only when they act on that attraction, but they are pedophiles regardless of whether they act on it or not. So the main distinction is that someone does not become a child molester until they have victimized a child. But an individual can be diagnosed as a pedophile even if they have not victimized a child. Pedophilia is recognized as a mental disorder, which is not illegal, but acting on it is a crime. At this time, there is no recognized cure for pedophilia, although there are therapeutic treatments that can help pedophiles learn to change their behavior and exercise self-control. So now you know. Let's dive into the show. All right, here we go. This is the Brimming Pot. Now, picture a child out at the playground or playing in the street. Innocent and youthful he or she is, and their whole life is ahead of them. This child is ignorant to the world beyond their young mind. An unfamiliar adult takes a shining and approaches this youngster. You, the parent, are briefly talking with a friend, and naturally you succumb to everyday distractions. For a moment, you turn away from your child and you notice the unwelcomed stranger approaching your little one. Your natural reaction involves the boiling of your blood, your nerves being racked to the core, and an instinctive parental protection takes hold of you. You play it cool, at least on the surface, and you approach the stranger without him noticing. Your child looks over at you, unsure of how to proceed. The stranger sees you sternly approaching, plays it cool, and acts as if he's making friends with your child. Now, I don't know about you listeners out there, but I envision myself following in the footsteps of King Kong going berserk after being provoked. And I'm not sure if I could contain the anger and outright hostility within me. Now, before I finish this hypothetical story, I'll shed some light. I'm going to share a story about a man named Jake Goldenflame, with an introduction of him courtesy of ZoomInfo.com. Once again, that's ZoomInfo.com. Jake is the author of Overcoming Sexual Urges. Jake is the author of Overcoming Sexual Terrorism, 60 Ways to Protect Your Child from Sexual Predators. And he is also a recovering sex offender. He was sent to prison for 5 years on 2 counts of child molestation in 1986. Where he went through therapy, spiritual counseling, and relapse prevention training. Goldenflame was the first convicted sex offender in the United States to publicly champion Megan's Law. Megan's Law is named after 7-year-old Megan Kanka, a New Jersey girl who was raped and killed by a known registered sex offender who had moved in across the street from the family without their knowledge. And to shed some light on that, I'm sure you're all very familiar with your computer appearing as if it has chicken pox. You go on the website, you check for sex offenders in your area, and they're all there. So, thank you, Megan's Law. In the wake of the tragedy, the Conkas sought to have local communities warned about sex offenders in the area. All states now have a form of Megan's Law. Jake Goldenflame first began writing as an Army Public Information Specialist in 1957. Following his completion of active duty with the Army, he attended the University of Southern California, where he studied at its School of Journalism before becoming a reporter on a community newspaper in Los Angeles. He went on to briefly become a radio news writer and then served as West Coast editor for a national film magazine, dealing with the technical side of the industry. According to his studies, he received a bachelor's degree in social science, a master's degree in American studies, and later a law degree, although he never sat out for the bar or became a practicing attorney. In 1986, he was accused of incest involving his daughter and admitted his misconduct. That's a rare case, mind you. Most men do not want to come out of the shadows. Most men or women, I should say. So anyway, he was sentenced to prison for 10 years, which he discharged in half that time under laws granting credits for remaining discipline-free and employed by the institution at one of its many jobs for inmates. He was released from prison in 1991, and he has never been accused of any other offense. Out of his struggles to understand and master his conduct, he became the first person registered under Megan's Law to champion that measure. Jake has been back in the community for 15 years, re-offense-free, and is now invited into prisons to present recovery workshops to other convicted sex offenders. Jake has been a guest on The Oprah Winfrey Show, The John Walsh Show, The Today Show, The Early Show, Good Morning America, and has regularly appeared on all major national broadcast and cable networks, as well as the leading newspapers, radio and television stations in both the U.S. and the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, and Japan. In 2005, he spoke before the Chicago branch of the Federal Bar Association. In 2006, he was permitted to meet with the staff of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee as it worked on its pending National Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act. And now for a commercial break. A quick shout out to SmoothRiverStudios.com for co-producing the audio for this episode. For all of your production and post-production audio needs, go to SmoothRiverStudios.com. Now, I don't give you this shining example as a scapegoat for all offenders, make no mistake, but for the sake of humanity, of which is in all of us at one point or another, if not permanently, and if somebody is capable of bettering themselves, then maybe there's a reason to approach certain situations with at least some subtlety. Generally speaking, a future child molester doesn't just throw his moral compass out the window at a young age. I'm reminded of a story about a man named Alan X, who started his deviant ways somewhere around age 7. He befriended a boy 2 years younger than him, coerced him into a secluded area, and asked him to strip down to nothing but his hind parts. According to Alan, an act of this nature was nothing but purely erotic, sensual, and spiritually metamorphic. He embraced every strip of clothing as it came off. Nothing physical happened, but emotions running hot are otherwise another beast. Once he and the younger boy parted ways, they both agreed to never speak a word of that to anyone. Aside from discussions of evil and wrongdoing, Alan wasn't aware that he was doing anything socially unacceptable. He was simply living out his innate fantasies. This man was a byproduct of emotionally neglectful and psychologically abusive parenting, but he just wanted to feel warmth and acceptance. He only found solace when charming young boys by connecting to them on a deeply emotional level. An example of this is the case of an Australian man who recorded in great detail the sexual contact that he had with more than 2,000 teenage boys. This man was an employee of a court who worked closely with juvenile offenders. He was caught in a child pornography investigation in the late 70s, and when he was in his early 60s, he committed suicide. Only after his death did police discover the magnitude of his criminal activity. In his house, they found names, photographs, tape recordings, and written descriptions of his sexual encounters with boys that had occurred over a 20-year period. His victims came from all parts of the community. In fact, many were from wealthy, prominent families. The amazing thing of all of this is that with all of these documented victims, and many of them later confirmed, the police had never received any complaints about the molester. I know that's kind of creepy, I understand. But that's normally how it goes. They're in the shadows and they don't come out. Sometimes they do, mostly they don't. So anyway, he operated in the shadows. But essentially some of these sexual predators are individuals who hide in plain sight, have a solid base of friends and family, fairly promising careers, and nobody thinks otherwise of them. Just think of the contemptuous questions that run through your mind when you consider all of this information. From sex offenders to domestic abusers, all of them have a story. But the ignorance and conjecture that lies beyond the back door to their lives is all that we know about. Envision yourself smiling and waving at your colleagues, greeting them cordially from time to time, and developing a work-based relationship, if not more. Unless you hang out with them outside of a professional environment, you literally have no idea what's going on unless they've already found someone in your inner circle that they can confide in. Prime example here, Jerry Sandusky, the former football coach of Penn State University. As the recent news exploits state, Sandusky had been an active child molester for decades, dating back as far as the 1970s, if not before. And allegedly, Joe Paterno knew all about it. Can you imagine going to Penn State and bearing witness to this earth-shattering story? I would literally be sick to my stomach for days. I could not normally attend class, study as diligently, or be able to wrap my head around what had transpired on campus and elsewhere. A transfer would be in order. For what it's worth, and considering the darker elements of our current utopia, as well as the monsters that lurk in the shadows, the ones privately crying for help, some of them haven't been given a fair shake in life. When a child is neglected, in whatever capacity, and after an extended amount of time has passed, they become vulnerable, and not just to the likes of molesters. They slowly become isolated, emotionally inept, socially awkward and or ignorant, and they lash out either publicly and or privately. Now it takes a special kind of care to relate to the mindset of a child who lacks any warmth or acceptance in their life. So here's a little transition into the probing of previously incarcerated child molesters. Believe it or not, when police detectives are questioning previously imprisoned child molesters for information about related or unrelated cases, their approach is everything. Just as serial child molesters lure their victims into a false sense of security by charming and relating to them, smart detectives know to do the exact same thing. As with any heated scenario, I have personally found that I can get along with almost any personality. This is not me tooting my own horn either. I've had full discussions with mentally ill people. I've escorted others off of private property without any qualms. I've befriended homeless people and charmed those notoriously hated and feared employees within any given office setting. And I have otherwise built relationships with some of the most difficult people by not inflicting my beliefs or occasionally radicalized mindsets regarding certain professional or personal subjects. I say all of this because a smart detective knows he has to tone it down and steer clear of any brash, confrontational measures being taken while trying to get information. When you step back and you realize exactly what type of person you are dealing with, you must step outside of yourself in order to begin the courting process. It may be uncomfortable, it may not fit the cut of your jib, but maybe that human connection that we're so scared of nowadays, thanks to the beauty of texting and social media, can blossom once more.
And now for a commercial break. A quick shout out to smoothriverstudios.com for co-producing the audio for this episode. For all of your production and post-production audio needs, go to smoothriverstudios.com.
So knowing all of this information, I'll return to the hypothetical story that I started at the beginning of this episode. We're back at the playground. The possible child molester or general threat is charming your child, and you are fuming mad like King Kong going nuts on a metropolitan area. At this point, you have two options. Option 1. You approach the man or woman who is charming your child, speak with him politely after excusing your child from the area, and see if it escalates from that point on. Or, option 2, you could unleash the animalistic instincts you can unleash the animalistic instincts that are begging for an emotional release at that very moment, and you can pulverize this person and move on with your life. Option 1 results in the dissecting of the problem at heart without physical altercation, and drawing legal attention to the issue if need be. So in turn, with option 1, you are turning what could be many negatives into an eventual positive. Those many negatives could be drawn out into hundreds, if not thousands, of incidents that encompass many encounters with innocent children who are lost in life. I'm an adult, so I understand the basic need for option 2. But in the general history of violence and where it leads, nothing good usually comes from it. I wanted to pound my brother's face into oblivion on numerous occasions. But I know it will only divide he and I from that point forth. The next time someone speaks out against a horrid child molester, just give some thought to a secondary approach. We are all lost souls in one way or another, and not everyone has had a fair shake in life. Once again, I want to thank you all for tuning into this week's episode and shedding some light on yet another dark subject. If you have any questions or concerns, or you just feel the need to speak with me about anything related to this episode or past episodes, please feel free to reach out to me at thebrimmingpot@gmail.com or via Facebook on the fan page called The Brimming Pot. Also, you can locate me on YouTube under the same title or on Twitter at EQ Samuels. Spread the love if you so choose and let others know about this podcast. All right. Thank you once again. This concludes this episode. I will hopefully hear from you all after the next episode. For now, take care out there and be safe. It's a dark and unfriendly world until someone or something brightens it up. Until next time, this is EQ Samuels, and this is The Brimming Pot. Farewell.